Zimbabwean security forces have been deployed to block an opposition protest for the third time in 5 days. The latest deployment is in the central city of Gweru, where police are patrolling in trucks and have cordoned off a university.
The opposition MDC, which called the rallies, has described the move as uncalled for. Joining us now to talk more on this is MDC presidential spokesperson Nkululeko Sibanda.
Well, a very good evening to you, Mr. Sibanda. Thank you so much for joining us. The past few days I've been in conversation with various MDC representatives, and I've asked them the own question, is this, why are they embarking on illegal protests at the expenses of, at the expense of MDC members? And I couldn't get a clear answer. Are these protests legal?
The protests are certainly legal according to the Zimbabwe Constitution adopted in 2013, which affords Zimbabweans the right and freedoms of association and freedom of speech. There are very few countries in which protesting is not allowed. Even in in some of the most pariah states, citizens are still allowed to show anger or dissatisfaction with any particular issue. And these are rights that Zimbabweans should enjoy in accordance with the Constitution. The Zimbabwe government, in its punitive state, has given the reason that it will not allow demonstrations because many Zimbabweans will participate. It says nearly 100,000 Zimbabweans will participate. Now, that doesn't make sense. The Constitution doesn't say, well, if all Zimbabweans are angry, they are not allowed to protest. It says Zimbabweans are allowed to protest as and when they feel they should. All they need to do is to inform the police, and the police don't necessarily have the right to deny a constitutionally guaranteed freedom.
Mr. Sibanda, the political players' dialogue process is still underway. So do these protests not undermine that process?
I think that we've got to set the record straight. There is no dialogue that's going on. What's happening at the moment is that there's a monologue between Mr. Mnangagwa and those who agree with him. The political dispute is between Mr. Mnangagwa and the MDC. There therefore cannot be anything called dialogue when there's only one party to the dialogue. Let us put the record straight once again. It was President Nelson Chamisa who said immediately after the disputed election he was open to discussion in order to move the country forward. President Chamisa has been watching processes in the DRC, processes in Mozambique, and he's been encouraging Mr. Mnangagwa to think more about the country, think more about the future than his ego. He's certainly shown that he's not interested in moving our country forward, and President Chamisa is encouraging him to come forth and put his ego to one side for the sake of the country. We can't continue like this. He is clearly unable to declare himself a legitimate president of the country. If he has to keep the army out of the barracks guarding Zimbabweans, they should be protecting Zimbabweans instead of bashing Zimbabweans as they are doing it now.
And how is the economic hardship driving ordinary citizens of Zimbabwe to unprecedented levels or acts of resistance?
Well, look, according to the Zimbabwe Republic Police, the economic situation certainly has gotten to a stage where Zimbabweans cannot bear with it anymore and will be forced to protest in one form or the other. So this is information coming out of the ZANU-PF government that they have built an economy that is unsustainable for a lot of Zimbabweans, and Zimbabweans need to get it rectified. And we know how to resolve Zimbabwe's problems. The solution is one singular and no other. You have to have political dialogue in order to resolve the crisis of confidence in the economy. And that crisis can only be resolved when there is dialogue between the two disputes of the 2018 election.
But President Mnangagwa called for that national dialogue early this year.
No, he did not. A lot of people make this mistake. President Chamisa of the MDC called for that national dialogue. And after he'd been beaten to it, to call for a national dialogue, as President Chamisa had done before the elections. Remember, President Chamisa before the election says, let's have a dialogue about how to have an election that will bestow confidence in the politics of our country, a politics that will provide legitimacy for the elected individuals and politicians. President Mnangagwa took that letter to the media in order to embarrass President Chamisa, saying that President Chamisa was was begging to talk to him. And that childish act cost us a whole election and produced an illegitimate result. President Chamisa foresaw this and wanted to foreclose the possibility of a disputed election. After a disputed election, President Chamisa offered the talks and says, any place, any time, as long as you have a neutral facilitator. And President Mnangagwa then said, oh, well, I want to be that facilitator. How can you be? Under any definition, how can one individual be the facilitator in a dialogue in which he is one of the disputants? It just doesn't make sense. And it cannot continue. We cannot continue like this where people continue to assume that because it's a head of it's somebody who calls themselves the head of state who's saying they have called for a dialogue. We forget to look at the realities of what he's calling a dialogue. You cannot have a dialogue in which one of the disputants, he can say he has a summit with a few friends. He has a meeting with a few friends. A dialogue is one that should be designed to resolve a dispute, and that dispute can only be resolved between the disputants, and there must be a neutral facilitator. President Chamisa is saying President Mnangagwa can call anybody to facilitate from SADC, can call any former head of state, even one of his own personal friends. It doesn't matter as long as that facilitator is credible and can be trusted to stand in the middle and allow for a reasonable discussion. So really,
Dr. Sibanda, just before I let you go, we don't have much time, unfortunately. I mean, clearly the country needs, reforms if it is to keep the country stable and, to allow this re-engagement with international donors. Now, President Mnangagwa has been on the charm offensive, luring international investment to come and invest in the country, and the jury's still out whether the international donors buy into that vision. How else do you suggest that President Mnangagwa should rebuild the country and the economy?
You should simply take up President Chamisa's offer for an inclusive dialogue between the disputants to the party, not this monologue that he has with his friends and the people that he agrees with every day. That's the only thing. And as to whether or not he's on a charm offensive, really, if this is a charm, it's a bad charm, you should not feed it to anybody. Because if you're charming people, they must come in. Since he's been on his charm offensive, the economy has continued to dive down. Clearly he's failing, and he now has to resort to living inside the barracks of State House. He's reported to be jumping through fences because he can't go through the normal gates because he's afraid of everybody, including his own guards. Look, he cannot continue like that. This is not sustainable for Zimbabwe. It's not sustainable for Mr. Mnangagwa himself. He must just grow up.
Dr. Sibanda, we thank you for your time. We appreciate it.